Hi and welcome to another episode of Peacemeg TV. In today's WordPress video, we're going to be taking a look at improving the security on a typical installation of WordPress. We're going to be using a free plugin that does have some additional features if you want to pay or subscribe to those, but we're not going to be taking a look at those, we're just looking at the free version of it. So let's see how we can do this. So the first thing we need to do is locate the plugin, install it, and then we can take a look at configuring it. So the plugin we're going to be using is called iThemes Security. It was originally called Better WordPress Security, but it's been taken over and updated. So we've got the iThemes Security. So I'm just going to choose to upload my plugin because I've already downloaded it. I'll choose my file, find that on my desktop, and we're looking for Better WP Security. Install that. Now that'll go through, it'll give us a simple wizard that we can set up some of the basics, but we're going to take a look at moving beyond that and actually take a look at some of the advanced features that I'd recommend sort of setting up on your installation. Now there are things on you that may not be what you're looking for, but I'm going to go through and show you the typical kind of thing that I do. So let's activate that plugin, and once we've activated it we should then see the simple wizard. We're going to ignore this free API key. This is to do with brute force network protection. You can install that if you want to. For now I'm going to leave that as is. What we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to secure our site. So that's going to go through and choose the most common used features that it recommends for every site. So let's just say secure my site. There are 4 steps to this. And once we've done that, then we can then go and take a look at actually tweaking this and setting it up a little bit more advanced fashion. Now I'd always recommend installing this as one of the first plugins you add to any WordPress installation. But obviously if you've got a site that you've already had it for a while that doesn't have any security on there and you want to add this in, then it's safe to do that on most installations. Obviously the most important thing you do before you do any of that is make a backup of both your database and of your entire website. So in the worst case scenario, if something goes wrong, you can put it all back to exactly where it was and not lose any sort of sleep over doing that. Now this gives us the ability to make a backup of the database, but it doesn't allow us to make a backup of the actual file structure. So this is something you either need to do through the control panel of your host, or you need to do it via an FTP piece of software where you can log in and make a backup. Either way, I would recommend doing that. If it's something you're not comfortable with, contact your hosting company, contact your webmaster, ask them to take care of it for you, so you've always got that backup there. Anyway, so the first thing we've got is make a backup of your site. So they're going to say make a backup of the database, and we'll say yeah, we'll make a backup of that. That'll email me a copy to the default email address as you've set up within your installation of WordPress. So you'll have a copy of that exactly as it is right now before we make any changes. The next option is to allow for file updates. Again, I'm going to say yes to that, and I'm also going to say yes to the one-click secure, because like I say, that's going to go through and set a pile of options for us. We can go and change those at any time, so we're not stuck with any of these changes. If you revise it and go back and think that's not for me, I need to take that off, I'd recommend you can do that quite easily. Obviously it's entirely up to you for the 4th step whether you want to help them improve. I'm going to say dismiss because I'm not really interested in this demo. And that's going to bring us to the iThemes Security dashboard. Now you can see they don't want you to lock yourself out, so you can temporarily whitelist your IP address, which it's the kind of thing, if you're worried about it, I'd recommend doing that. Follow that through. But what we're going to take a look at is the security features and what's been left over that it needs us to fix ourselves. So you can see we've got high risk, medium, low and completed tasks. And at the moment we're looking at all the tasks. So anything in red is a high priority, and they recommend you change that. And honestly, I would recommend you change it as well. Medium priority, certain aspects of this are dependent upon the installation you have and dependent upon what you want to do. But we'll run through the ones that I'd recommend changing on there in a moment. Low priority are things that, well, you can change if you want to, but they're not vitally important. And again, we'll run through some of those and we'll take a look at what I'd recommend. And finally we've got all the completed options, which we can edit if we want to, or we can come back in and we can tweak those via the ordinary dashboard that we've got available to us, where we can edit all of the settings. We've then got any WordPress file permissions which you can tell us, I'm going to get a pile of warnings and things on you because I'm working on a local server. I'm working on my own machine. I'm not online, so there are going to be certain things that I'm going to see problematic because I'm not configured in the same way if you were using an online host. So I'm not going to take too much notice of those kind of things. That's all fine. I can live with that. So let's go and take a look at some of these options that I recommend as high priority. Now, by default, when you create a new account, it'll come up as admin being the username for it, which if you haven't changed that yourself right at the beginning, then you can do it now. Obviously, you need to make a note of the fact that you're going to have a different name for your admin user. And also it's telling us that we don't have any scheduled database backups, which again, I would recommend you do. You can either have them sent to you via email or you can have them kept on the server. Now, most of the time, these files are not particularly big. They're just a simple text file with MySQL in there. I tend to have mine sent through to me via email, and I keep backups for at least 3 revisions. Then I'm going to be sort of knowing that if I've got a problem, I should have a backup for it. You can adjust the frequency of these backups. As a bare minimum, if you've got a site that doesn't update very often, I would recommend setting it to something like 30, 31 days. You get a monthly backup. If you've got a site that you update on a very regular basis, you could do daily, you could do weekly, however you want to do it, whatever kind of frequency you think is going to be beneficial to you in your particular instance. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can make the changes to these first 2 options to start off with, the high priority ones. So let's click to fix the admin. And that'll take us through. It says, warning, backup your database. Well, we've already done that, so we know we don't have to worry about that. We're going to enable that we can change it. We can put in whatever admin username you want on there. Again, make a note of it. Make sure you know that you've done it. It's also worthwhile changing the user ID from the default number 1, which obviously when you've installed this, it's the first entry in the database. The reason you need to do this is because you can have like injection attacks and things like that, where if you've got the admin user on there, then if they don't have admin as the username, if you continue to be sort of left as the user ID number 1, then they can try to sort of brute force attack your website based upon the user ID, which is number 1, and in this case the admin of the site. So again, I'd recommend you take that, save that out, so it's going to make those changes for you. And again, like I say, make sure you take a note of whatever you change your admin username to. The ID number isn't particularly important, but obviously, make a note of that. Last thing you want to do is forget what you change your admin username to and then lock yourself out. Next thing we're going to take a look at as we scroll down is change the content directory. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that because that can tend to create all kinds of havoc with plugins that are expecting to find where you put your content in the WP content folder. Generally, that's not too much of an issue. Of course, you're dealing with sensitive information, but most of the time you're just going to have your image files, maybe some PDFs, some Word documents and things like that in there. If you think this is important, take a look through this, read through what they recommend and make the changes based upon what you want to do. For me, I tend to find that this has just caused problems in the past, so I tend to stay away from it. Then we've got change the database prefix. This is something that when I set up my databases in my installation of WordPress, I always put a random a random prefix to my database. So again, it's just useful to have this in there because then WP underscore is the general prefix for your databases. You can stick some numbers and some letters and things in front of that, behind it, or replace it completely, followed by an underscore and then whatever you want to call your database. It's good because again, it does reduce the potential for attacks. So highly recommend that you do that either when you create your installation of WordPress right at the beginning, or if you haven't done it and you're using iTheme security, check that box, change the database prefix, and then you're going to make yourself a little bit more secure again. So go through, make those changes. I say I'm not going to worry too much with this, I'm just taking you through it just to show you what's kind of going on. So next we're going to move on, we're going to go back to the dashboard. Now I'm obviously going to still see the same errors that I had previously, so I'm going to leave that as is. I'll come through to the scheduled database backups, hit fix it, and that'll take us through where we can schedule our backups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check enable schedule backups. We can set that to 31 days, and you can see if we scroll up a little bit, we can see how we want those backups to be dealt with. If you've got a database that has more than just WordPress in it, you can save the entire database. You can choose what particular fields you want to save within that data or tables in that database, or you can just back up the database for WordPress itself. So each of these options is pretty much self-explanatory. By checking this box, you make a backup of all of the tables in your database, even if not related to WordPress. You can then choose how you want to have your backup sent to you, whether you want to save locally and send an email, whether you want it email only or just save locally only. I tend to leave mine set to email so I can get them sent through to the specified email address once every whatever the period I've set up is. Your backup location then will tell you where those files will be located, and then you can access those via FTP. Again, obviously you want to make sure that if you save these into a location that people can get access to, that you make sure you go in, take those off there as soon as they're done, and delete them. The last thing you want is access to your WordPress MySQL database. So I generally tend to recommend having that sent through to you via email only. If you are keeping them on the server, how many backups do you want to keep on there? So you can specify that you have 1, 2, 5, 10, whatever you want. Set in, like I say, we'll train all backups if you leave it at 0. Do you want to zip your database backups to compress them? Obviously, if you store them online, then yes, it's worthwhile doing, and obviously if you send them via email, it's worth doing. Then you can choose which tables are going to be excluded. So if you are being picky about particular tables in a database that has more than just WordPress in it, you can specify what tables are and aren't included in there. Once you've done that, hit Save All Changes, and that will then allow you to create regular copies based upon the interval that you've specified. So there are the two important things that they need to do to make sure that they're on every site is covered, just for the sort of the major security issues. What we're going to do now is take a look at some of the other options we've got available to us and what I would recommend that you implement on a typical installation of this. So let's take a look at what other features we've got available to us. So I'm just going to scroll back up to the top, and I'm going to go through these settings and just go through what I'd recommend. First of all, you can see we've got the allow iTheme security right to the wp-config and the htaccess files. That's checked as part of the default installation, and I would recommend leaving that unless you find you have some problems. Send a digest email. I would recommend this highly, because if you've got times where your site is being attacked, or you've got things going on your site like lockouts and things like that, it'll send you an email every single time it encounters something like that, and that can just get overwhelming and frankly very annoying. So what I'd always recommend is check the send a digest email, because what it'll do is just send you a cut down notification of all the things that have happened over a particular day. Then you can specify what email address you want to send that to. Your host lockout message, if you get locked out for any reason from the admin of the site or on the front end of the site, so if you enable things like the 404 error detection, and then when someone's trying to access the site, they find lots of 404s and they get locked out, this is the message that they'll see. So you may want to change that for something that's a little bit more self-explanatory. Alternatively, you can leave it just as error. Again, you've got the same thing then if you want to use a lockout or a community lockout if it's dealing with an IP address. I would recommend enabling the Blacklist repeat offender. It's quite useful because it's a centralized database of repeat offenders. So instead of these coming along and trying to attack your site and getting the ability to sort of come in and try it on a regular basis, this will go through, see that IP address, or that IP address has been picked up, blacklisted, and then will immediately stop them from trying to access your site. So it's a great way of cutting down the amount of potential problems you have from people that are trying to attack websites all over the place. You can set the threshold, the lockout period, and the blacklist periods and things like that. You can also put a whitelist in there if you want to, so you can whitelist IP addresses that you never want to block out. Obviously, if you've got a static IP for your particular address, it's worthwhile putting in there just so you don't end up with problems. And if you've got other places, like I say, if you've got a work environment you want to log in that uses static, then you can put that in there. You can even use ranges and wildcards, and that's listed below. It gives you some examples, so give a better explanation than I can, but it's worthwhile having a look at if you think you want to sort of maintain access to this if there's any problems. Do you want to be emailed of lockouts? Again, it's the kind of thing that can get a little bit overwhelming, but if you want to, you can do it. How do you want to log these events? Do you want to store them in the database, or do you want to keep them on file, or do you want to do both? How long to keep those database logs, the path where they're stored, all exciting stuff. If you want to hide the security menu, which is up here at the top, you can do that just by checking this box and then saving it. Then we move on to the 404 error detection. Now, if you've got a site that you put files on and off, and you have pages that you turn on and off, and you've got potential for people trying to access links that are there for a short period of time and then disappear, 404 error detection can be a little bit of a nightmare, because it will block people out if they try to access pages that are no longer there through no fault of their own. You've got to bear in mind that your end user isn't necessarily someone that's trying to break into your site. So be a little bit careful with the error detection. If you do the 404 detection, if you do put that on, make sure you whitelist your own IP address if you can, just because then if something does go wrong, you can still access it, because if you're locked out of the front end and you're locked out of the admin, which can be an absolute nightmare. So be careful with that particular facility. If you do check it, you can see it opens up a whole range of other things where you can put whitelist files and things like that in there. Away mode. If you are the kind of person that you're only ever going to access this site between, should we say, office hours 9 to 5, then you can enable away mode, so the admin part of the site is unavailable during the specified periods of time. So you could say from 5:01 until 8:59 the next day, you cannot access the admin on the site, and then during the work hours you can. Again, entirely up to you. If you find that this is something you're doing for a personal blog where you want access to it 24/7, don't check that box. But if you've got something where you are only going to access it during certain periods of time, it does add an extra level of security, because it's completely unavailable during that period of time that you specify. So we'll uncheck that. Banned users. You can completely ban users, and again, it uses the hackrepair.com blacklist feature, or you can enable ban users, where you can specify what hosts you want to ban or any user agents you may want to ban. And again, there's an explanation of what these particular things pertain to below. I'd recommend reading those and reading up a little bit more on using IP addresses and things, so you have a better understanding. I wouldn't recommend playing about with this if you're not comfortable with dealing with IP addresses and IP ranges. Brute force protection. If you signed up for the free API for your brute force protection, then you can input the relevant information and you can utilize those facilities here. You can also receive email updates about WP security from iThemes. Well, I don't really want that, so I'd uncheck that. And once you've done it, you'd save it out. Your database backups, well, we've already covered that. Your file change detection. If someone accesses files on your site via FTP or some other method, and they try to change those files via name or anything else to do with it, you can stop them from doing that by enabling the file change detection. And you've got a whole host of options available to you in there. You can split your file checks into chunks. You can include and exclude files and folders, so you can specify what you do and don't want to include and exclude on there. You can even include and exclude, you can even set ignored file types, so they won't actually make any changes if someone changes a JPEG or a PNG file or a log file or one of the translation files for part of WordPress. You can also be specified that you want to be notified if any changes, or you can display the file change admin warning. Again, it kind of comes down to how you want to work with this. I'm going to uncheck it for now. One of the features that I would 100% recommend you do is this, the hide backend. By default, anybody that uses WordPress or anybody that wants to get into WordPress will know that wp-admin, wp.login are the two ways to get access to the admin. You can change those to whatever you want. So if you enable this, you can specify what you want your login to be, what you want your registration slug to be. If there's a not found slug, which generally tends to be not found, or if you want to create custom login actions, you can do that. But I'd 100% recommend you do this. You change your login features. Change it to something a little bit more logical, something like login. Avoid things like admin. Make it a little bit more obtuse. If you want to have SSL, so you've got an SSL certificate on your site, then you can force it to be front end and back end. Or per content, or the whole site. You can force SSL for the dashboard, so anybody that tries to access this without the HTTPS will not get access to it. It'll force it through to the SSL connection. So if you are using SSL on your site, it's worthwhile enabling that, so you've got that extra layer of protection. And I would recommend probably set your entire site to be SSL if you've got that certificate on it, and not just restricting it to the admin. It's going to be worthwhile for the extra layer of security it's going to add for you. Another thing that I would 100% recommend is enabling strong password enforcement. Now, even if you don't have more than one user on your website, you don't allow sort of editors and subscribers and things like that, or even commenters and things, I would still set this to be a minimum level of subscriber. Specify enable strong password enforcement. So that's going to mean that people can't use simple passwords like their dog's name or their house name and their number. It's got to be something a little bit more complex. It's an extra layer of security that, yes, it may annoy people a little bit. They've got to have some kind of obscure password, but when their account gets hacked or your site gets taken offline because they've had some silly password that was ridiculously easy to guess, like password, you're going to be thankful for enabling that feature. And don't worry about what they think. It's your website and you've got to deal with the aftermath when it gets hacked. Enable that, set it to subscriber, so the minimum level of anybody subscribing to your site, subscribers, editors, administrators, all have to use strong passwords. And now we've got system tweaks. Now, system tweaks are a couple of things that they're not massively important, but they do make life a lot easier and make your site considerably more secure. System files prevent public access, so people can't just type these in and start taking a look at things. Yep. Disable directory browsing. Well, the last thing you want people to do is be able to browse your directory. So, for example, your WP content, if they know WP content / images, for example, and a month and a date or whatever, a year, then they could get access and browse all the files that are contained within that particular directory. It's not very difficult to sort of figure out for some people. So we'll say we want to disable that. You can filter the request methods, so you can stop people editing the actual URL and using the filters of trace, delete and track and stuff like that. Up to you whether you use that or not. Personally, I don't generally tend to use it. Suspicious query strings. Well, if you've got query strings that look like they've been edited, so people are trying to hack it in through the URL, they're trying to do sort of SQL injection attacks and things like that, you can try to stop that by filtering out any suspicious looking queries. Filter non-English characters. Again, it's all to do with filtering your query strings, and if you've got non-English characters, you can specify that they will be ignored. And again, the same for filter long URL strings. So if people are trying to string together a huge long URL to try to do an injection attack on your database, this will help stop that from being problematic. Remove file writer permission, so people can't access and edit your WP config and htaccess. This is something that you can find will cause some issues with some plugins. If you enable this and you find some plugins have a problem, you get access errors, you may want to FTP into the actual files that we're talking about, the htaccess, the WP config PHP, and change those from what this will set it to from 0444 to 0664, which will allow you to sort of have a little bit more flexibility on what can be done with it. Disable PHP in uploads, most definitely. People can't execute any kind of PHP in the uploads folders. Stops having loads of problems with that. So yep, enable that, hit save it. We've also got a couple of other things now for the WordPress tweaks, which is more to do with the WordPress than your actual server. Windows Live Writer header, remove it. So if you don't use Live Writer as part of, I think it's Windows Live, you can enable that to remove it. If you don't use things like Flickr, then you can remove the RSD, the really simple discovery header. Obviously, if you do use Flickr, you need to make sure that's enabled. Reduce comment spam. It's always going to be useful. If you use that in conjunction with Akismet, then you really should find that you have a lot less spam on your site. So if you have a problem with it, I'd recommend enabling that. Disable the file editor. Now this is more to do with the actual editor inside your plugins and inside your themes and things like that, which you can enable it, you can disable it for trackbacks and pingbacks, or you can completely disable it. Now if you use Jetpack, you can't disable it because it uses those features, but if you don't use anything like that, then I would recommend completely disabling it just for that extra little bit of security. Obviously it's dependent upon you and your requirements. Replace jQuery with safe version. Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. Have a little read through, check if that's applicable to you. If you think it's useful, use it. Disable login message, error messages. Yeah, this is good, because if someone tries to log in and they use an incorrect username, sorry, an incorrect password but a correct username, it'll tell them WordPress will tell them that their password is incorrect, not their username. So once people find out what the username is, they could then try using brute force to try to get the password, because they're 50% the way there. This goes in conjunction with things like where you have admin. If they test admin, which is probably one of the first things they're going to do, if that exists and it tells them your password is wrong, they know admin exists. So disable the login error messages. It's a little less user friendly because you don't know why you can't get in there, but at least you get a notification saying you can't get in. It just doesn't tell you why. Force users to choose a unique nickname. Now, when someone registers and they go into their profile, they can update, they can put their username in, they'll have their username assigned, they can have their email address assigned, they can put their first name, their surname and nickname. And what this does is it specifies the nickname can't be the same as their username, and it can't be the same as anybody else's nickname. Up to you. Again, it's one of those things that if you find that it's just you on the website, you are the administrator, you control everything, well, it doesn't make a massive difference, but it's not going to hurt the ticket. And disable users' author page if their post count is 0. If you've got people that are subscribers, should we say, they're not going to have a post count on the site because they're only allowed to post comments. So the last thing you want is for the potential hacker to be trying to access that, find someone's name, have a look at their comment section, find out their user number 37, for example, and then they've got their user ID, which they can then use for a brute force attack, or they can use through SQL injection attacks. It's worthwhile ticking it just for that peace of mind. So that's pretty much all the settings. We can switch over to the advanced settings and see what's in there. But we've kind of gone through, and we should have, if you've gone through all the things we've talked about, you should have configured most of the options that are applicable to you when you're setting this up. Now, we took a look at this earlier on, which is to enable the admin user renaming. You can have it redo the enable new salts, then the WordPress salts, which are unique to every installation of WordPress. Be careful doing that. The last thing you want to do is cause yourself problems. And as we saw, that change the content directory, which we don't recommend. Finally, we've got logs. If we go in there, that'll give us a breakdown of any action that the site has taken. So people that have tried to log in, people that have been blacklisted, people that have actually logged in, it'll tell you all that information. It'll give you a breakdown of it. You can even filter that down to say only invalid login attempts or all of the login data. I would recommend coming in here and checking this every couple of weeks, couple of months, depending on how busy your site is, because it can build up quite a considerable backlog. Check through it. If you see any problems, take a look at those in a bit more detail. But clear your logs on a regular basis so you don't end up with tens of thousands of useless logs spanning back multiple bloody years that are just going to fill up your database and slow your site down. Well, that's a look at iThemes security. I hope what this has done is it's given you an insight into how you can secure your WordPress installation through this fantastic free plugin. Now, if you've got any comments or feedback on anything we've covered in this, or any questions, please by all means pop those in the comment section below. I'll do my best to get back to you and answer any questions you may have. If you found this video useful, please hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up to say you liked it, and until next time, take care.